Welcome everybody to the Ukrainian Museum of Canada. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen Flipping. I'm the executive director here, and I'm just so very pleased to have Rachel Ormshaw back with us today to talk about the exhibition design in this exhibition that we're standing in. Although she's responsible for it all over the museum right now. The Ukrainian Museum of Canada was founded here in 1936 in Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis, at a time when Ukrainians weren't particularly welcome here still in Canada, although we've been invited, and at a time when Ukrainian culture was under severe attack in Soviet Ukraine in the 1930s, when Ukrainians had been through the Holodomor in the early 1930s, and then it was just as Stalin, the museum was founded just before Stalin's very intense eradication of Ukrainian artists and writers and thinkers and nationalists in the later 1930s. It's an extraordinary museum, the oldest museum in Saskatoon, the oldest Ukrainian museum in North America, with this beautiful collection of more than 12,000 artifacts and artworks, and it has some very high points over its long history. And then when our new team here came in about 4 years ago, it had been going through a bit of a sleepy couple of decades, and this exhibition, this space that we're in right now, actually it had more or less the same exhibition in it since the museum opened in this purpose-built museum facility in 1980. And so that exhibition, which like this one contains a lot of clothing, it had remained unchanged with very, by the time we came, old-fashioned, kind of dated didactics and displays. And it took us a long time to figure out how to deal with this space. The space was one reason why people who love the museum didn't come very often, because you would come every 5 years and see the same things. And so we had a lot of conversations with staff and some former curators and people from the community about what we could do, and we realized this doesn't have to be a new permanent display. We could change it out on a more regular basis. And so that began the transformation of this space. And in all of our conversations about this space, we realized one of the things that we have that not a lot of museums have is a whole lot of texture, we wanted our spaces to sing. How to do that, though, we can know what we want. How to do that is a different story. 2 years ago, we hired Rachel Ormshaw as through a Young Canada Works in Heritage grant as a summer student, as a curatorial assistant or collections assistant. I can't remember.
It was curatorial.
Curatorial assistant. And it was, she'd actually applied for collections assistant along with Jaden, and we got back to her, and we had this wonderful interview with Rachel, who is a visual artist in her own right. This is where I get my reading glasses. She's an interdisciplinary artist and a curator now whose work centers on textiles, material, culture, and memory. So she had just graduated with her master's degree in visual studies from University of Toronto, and her final exhibition had involved weaving and these looms that had been remade into contemporary sculptures. And so she's trained in textile design. Weaving is central to her practice, both as a material process and a way of thinking through how objects carry history and meaning. She thought a lot about her grandmother as she did her final project, and for actually, we don't have very many in the room today, but for our Ukrainian community, Rachel descends from the Kondrashuk and the Semko families in Hafford, and those are well-known families here in Saskatoon. Her work spans sculpture, sound, she's a musician as well, and installation, often incorporating found objects and materials with lived histories. Alongside her studio practice, Ormshaw works in curation and exhibition design, approaching exhibitions as collaborative, research-driven spaces shaped by close engagement with objects and stories. Rachel has a wonderful aesthetic, and it was just so great when she first started, that I was able to say, we want to do an exhibition about this, and she would go and kind of make it happen, and really had a great feeling for the space and how to lay out objects and how to choose colors, and This exhibition, Folk Imaginaries, which was curated primarily by Natalka Chomiak, who's sort of the brainchild behind the show, and her daughter, Alexandra Shkandrij, along with Rachel Ormshaw, had been sort of, the initial idea was borrowed from a similar exhibition that had been at Osarada in Winnipeg a couple of years earlier. But the challenge for us here was how to make it work in a way where the space could really sing. And we have some big limitations. We still have, for instance, carpet that's 40 years old on the floor, and a lighting system that's dated, and we don't have all the kind of wow architecture of the Rimini Modern, although we have a beautiful space in here. We also have a very limited budget compared to most other museums here in town, and so Rachel was tasked with a very limited budget and some dated elements in the space, and she pulled together a really beautiful show. So we thought, and I know Natalka Chomiak and Alexandra Shkandrij, for them it was very important that Rachel give a talk about the design, because that wasn't something they could do. That was something only Rachel could bring to the table in this show. So please join me in welcoming Rachel Ormshaw.
Thank you, Jen. I'm going to try to live up to that really nice introduction. Thanks, everybody, for being here and coming through the sort of Christmas in April that we're having. It's really fun. So we came to the exhibition through a few different places. Like Jen said, through a collaboration between myself and Natalka Chomiak and Alexandra Shkandrij. Natalka specifically, her curatorial vision sort of grounds everything, and the show really is her brainchild. But also we wanted to think, we had a desire to think about museums generally and exhibitions and interpretive materials in new ways, and trying to tell stories in new ways. But also, I really wanted to honor and respect the objects that were shown, and the history behind them. So for me, designing the exhibition was very organic because it came really directly from the objects. So because the show is so focused on clothing, a central set of questions for the design process became, how are garments typically displayed in museums? What assumptions shape those displays? And how can we challenge those assumptions to spark new ideas about this clothing? I have a couple of examples from the Brooklyn Museum exhibition on Georgia O'Keeffe, which showed a lot of her clothing and her, ephemera from her life. I have a lot of big thoughts and big feelings about how textile work gets displayed in museums and galleries, but for this show specifically, we kind of collectively, I think, throughout the whole staff felt that clothing, and particularly folk clothing or traditional dress or antiques, are presented kind of static, flat, removed from the lives lived around and within the garments and the processes that created them. So in trying to reconsider all of these things, which is a big ask, we wanted to use the exhibition design to kind of shift those ideas rather than focusing only on the finished garments. The design of the show, I wanted to kind of center the process of making them, making visible the patterns, the materials used, and the systems of care that shape how the objects in the exhibition came to exist and how they've been maintained over the years, which is a really big part of it as well. Also, though, along with all those big overarching ideas about how the show will kind of change the face of exhibition design, we also wanted the show to be really lively and fun and beautiful and delightful for people to look at. Making it fun and lively, I think, also challenges that flattening and the dulling of the real life of clothing, especially Ukrainian clothing, which is so vibrant and luscious and exciting. Natalka and I spent a lot of time in the collection here together, which was like my favorite thing of my life so far. I really came to love that woman very deeply, and I think the feeling is mutual. So while we knew we were using many, many pieces from her personal collection of accessories and garments, we were also looking for links and exciting oddities and things that really piqued our interest in the collection. We just had so much fun during that time, and we ended up kind of playing a game in the end where we would open a drawer in the collection and kind of silently pick the one that we liked the best and then point to it, and we always pick the same one. And I don't know, we would like go for lunch, and we just had like a real kind of melding of the minds. We knew what we wanted the pieces to speak to conceptually, so that was really exciting. But we also, like I said, just it was fun, and I think that kind of sense of fun comes into the design as well. So through that process in the collection, this is the right slide actually. Thank you. While Natalka was constantly teaching me things about Ukrainian fashion and fashion history in general, we were also having a lot of conversations throughout the museum with other staff, with visitors. Jen often speaks about how exhibitions here aren't really curated by one person, and I really love that line of thinking, and I think it's especially true for this show. So many ideas came throughout the whole process from so many different people. But one thing Natalka and I both learned from the former librarian here, Anastasia Misan, was that the little embroidered symbols on the waistline of sorochke were added there to mark familial or village ties for traveling women, often to make sure that you didn't end up marrying your cousin, I think, was the source of these little designs. So we found this one, and this was kind of the one that sparked this conversation, and Natalka linked it to the Berlin needlework rose design that you see on the left there. Next slide. So originating in Germany in the early 1800s, the Berlin needlework patterns spread around the world by the mid-1800s. They relied on point paper, which is just graph paper, and if you're familiar with needlework, embroidery, cross-stitch patterns, you'll feel very familiar with this. The charts were made more accessible in that time in the early 1800s because there were new innovations in colored printing, so you could print colorful designs for roses. The Berlin needlework ones are often more, they have 5 or 6 colors within them. But these charts eventually made their way inside of the wrappers for packaged soap, which sent the roses kind of everywhere throughout the world, including Ukraine, and Ukrainian women loved them. And so then we were really excited about this rose and how that rose became the design on this sorochka that was helpful to this woman who embroidered it. And because such a central thesis of the show is how designs and garment styles and clothing kind of move throughout cultures and time periods, the Berlin needlework rose, which, as you can see here, and I think if you're familiar with Ukrainian embroidery, it's thought of as a very Ukrainian design, became a real touchstone for the design of the show and kind of an emblem of the show's theme, and just fun to include as such a classic Ukrainian kind of embroidery staple. Next slide. So you can see this sorochka here, and then this petichka have the kind of rose design. The one on the right, the petichka, is a nice beaded sort of iteration of the Berlin rose, but you can really see the rose kind of throughout the show. And luckily the designs are so popular that I was able to kind of trace the design, and then the amazing Lindsay helped me to take these classic designs and turn them into stencils and make them for the walls. Yeah. So following that line of thinking from this rose design, other embroidery designs popped out throughout our research and the prep for the exhibition, and it felt natural to also stencil those designs on the walls. So taking embroidered designs directly from garments in the collection, I again traced the designs, and again with Lindsay's help, I created more stencils for the walls. We really wanted to create as much texture and visual interest as we could throughout the show, but using that texture, grounding it in the real texture and color and pattern of Ukrainian clothing. So this shirt, which features the star or rose embroidery design, became this next design. And then from there, the next design, and then the next design. And then that's the stencil that ended up on the wall. And then there are just a few more, yeah. And then there's just a few more slides of other iterations of, so the next one came from this in the library here, we have a catalog of embroidery symbols and Ukrainian symbols and embroidery. So this next one came from that, and then carried on to the next slide, which is that's the stencil that ended up going on the wall, which I think is on the other side of that. Yeah. Yeah. So, next slide, please. When it came to thinking about color and the palette for the show, I also wanted that to come straight from the clothing. I think a lot of outside perceptions about Ukrainian traditional clothing lands on the sort of red, black, white embroidered palette, which is so beautiful, but it doesn't show the full story of, like, there's just an explosion of color in the collection here, and I wanted to highlight that. I love this hot pink on both of these sorochka, which people don't think of as a color that could have been being used in the late 1800s, early 1900s, but there were actually great advances in these like aniline synthetic dyes that allowed for really vivid color, and those threads were being traded in Ukraine, and the women loved them and used them all the time because they were so exciting and fun, and they spoke to this kind of like luscious, rich texture that was already happening in Ukrainian clothing before those dyes. Next slide. And then the green and purple here I really love. And again, I think it's kind of an unexpected color combination, and using the two together is really fun. The vibrant colors of this glass beaded necklace, which probably would have been layered with multiple other necklaces, Karali, Dukuchi, that we also have in the show. And those colors I thought were really exciting. And then this example from the 20s, which is here, the shape of the garment, obviously, as you can, it's kind of getting more into like a more quote unquote modern style, or a style that fit the time period. But the embroidery was really staying in that tradition, and then the colors I thought were really beautiful and fit with everything else. Yeah, next one. So I kind of created this, which was really ripping those colors, and I was really excited about how vibrant it was. The next one. And then we decided to make it a little bit more subdued because we didn't want to overwhelm the actual objects and the garments. We wanted the color palette to speak to the clothing and be a part of the show, but not to overwhelm and take over from the actual objects in the space. I thought of the pops of color around the show as kind of small ways to create like little visual rhymes that could kind of pull the narrative thread around the room. So, following thoughts on the color palette, I started wondering how, as Jen said, how can we use this big, beautiful room, this space that is so great with so many, like, I think the dynamics of the walls is really wonderful. I had examples of the ways the space had been used in the past, which were super effective and lovely, but I really wanted to change some of the orientations of things and just make the room feel a little bit different from what had been done previously. So I was excited about this idea of a platform, which this one is from the Royal Ontario Museum. It stood out to me initially for the color because I was kind of loving those like peachy tones. And then I started mocking up ideas for how we could change the shape of the platform and make it a little bit more organic. So I had the help of lovely summer student Victoria Pomerleau, who's really good at using this software called SketchUp, where you can do exhibition design, and she helped me to create this. I'm, as you may have noticed from the beginning of this talk, not great with tech, so I'm kind of a Luddite, but she was really wonderful and really excited about the show. She's a fashion student at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, so we had a lot of fun working on that. And then luckily, we also have the great help and are so wonderfully happy to get to work with Clint Neufeld, who built this beautiful platform basically like from this photo. I didn't have any technical information for him. I showed him this and he took a measurement of the wall, and then he came back with exactly what I wanted, which was unbelievably lucky and amazing. Um, I wanted it to have this organic shape because I thought about it, okay, if we're following the objects throughout the show, how can this platform follow the objects? So having this like more organic drapey shape instead of following the colors and I guess with the orange it does follow the color, but thinking about the shape of it instead of following the color and the pattern, um, could it follow the drape and form of linen and hemp? So the space is gorgeous in this room. Like I said, I really appreciate all the vertical space. Um, it's challenging though because you have to decide whether or not you want to exaggerate it or minimize that vertical space depending on what you want to achieve with the show. I really loved this tool wall that was up when I first started working at the museum. It was like my first day here, and I walked in and I was like, wow. Because I really just love old things, but also because I loved how that wall used the vertical space of how that installation used the vertical space of this wall. We went back and forth kind of about what would be best for the wall and how best to utilize it to serve the show. And thinking through that, I thought a lot about the work of textile and installation artists. How artists take cues from the material reality of different textile processes and sort of elevate the process into the subject matter of their work. This Anne Lau piece, she's showing the paper wrapping, which is kind of associated with museum care, and in our collection we have, so we obviously have the proper paper care for all of the textiles. So I loved this piece for that. The found paper aspect of that materials list is exciting to me, and I was kind of considering how like found elements and language of the museum space could be a part of the design of the show. So much of the design process, like I said, came together while Natalka and I were in the museum's collection and in the drawers and in the closets and the rolling shelves. So I was excited by this. And then I also really love this piece by Lau, which kind of presents pattern and color. And I was thinking about this kind of layering and thinking about, okay, how can we translate this into this wonderful challenge of the vertical space of the wall. And then this piece by an artist, Karen Craven, kind of started me on thinking about how, because we're designing a show about, it's so much around garments, and I wanted it to really center process, and how could we do that? Well, it should inherently include pattern pieces. So the next slide. I was also really excited by these two stills from Sergei Parayanov's films. This one's The Color of Pomegranates, and then the next one is from Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, which is a great film. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. Those also really influenced the way I was thinking about this big use of space on the wall, and I think especially this one, I feel like when I was putting the slideshow together, I realized how directly I had like I feel like looking at it and looking at this little set here, you can really tell that I was looking at that when I was thinking about this wall. Next slide. So, because I wanted to honor the process of creating the garments through to the design of the show, that really naturally led from all those inspirations to the wall of patterns. We wanted to use that space well and have it be meaningful for the vocabulary of the show. And the museum happens to have a large supply of Ukrainian sewing patterns for folk dance costumes, which felt like a really great tie for the show. And they kind of, I don't know, I feel like they wanted to be included. Sewing patterns are so recognizable to so many people and have such a strong nostalgic aura. I think they can elicit really strong feelings. My own mom has sort of like a visceral shudder when she sees them because she has bad associations with sewing. But I think they also hold really positive and caring associations for people. I guess they're kind of like a test for your feelings towards sewing, but I love them. I really was happy to include these patterns aside from how recognizable they are to those who have memories of sewing in general. But I was really happy to be able to use these ones because the shapes of the patterns really reflect the shapes of the clothing. And I think it's exciting to see sort of you can see the big swing of a coat, or the strange, weird curved shape that ends up becoming a collar. And it was wonderful to be able to use these specific patterns instead of having, finding any old like Vogue pattern envelope. So Victoria and I got to play around with them a lot, and that was really fun. We got to use the dance floor downstairs, which is, it turns out, also a really good place to work out installation strategies. We tried iterations where the clothing would sit on top of the patterns, but we decided it was best to have the garments kind of positioned on the wall within the overarching pattern of the patterns on the wall. And I think it kind of helps to make it more obvious that the clothing is really tied to the patterns versus sitting above them and away from them. So when it comes to displaying the garments, something we thought about basically from the jump was how to display them in a way that would be exciting, a bit different, something that could kind of create more of that aliveness in the space versus a more traditional way of looking at them. Again, I looked at a lot of examples of artists working in textile and installation, thinking about different ways to display these garments. This Natalka Chomiak installation I thought was really wonderful. In this one, she's using unraveled threads of the garments and then hanging them above. Next. But I was also looking at hanging in different orientations, different ideas about layering, and again, texture. I feel like texture is kind of a major buzzword for designing the show. These two examples came from a design magazine and then a market in Ukraine, an image from a market in Ukraine. So that kind of started to help bring some cohesion into how I was thinking about it. And then ultimately the decision to present some garments on mannequins, but to have those mannequins kind of follow that pop of color, and then have some on the wall to create these kind of layered displays felt like it served the show best. For the accessories, we really wanted to treat them not as secondary or diminished in comparison to the garments. The accessories in Natalka's vision and in her writing also tell really important stories about how Ukrainian design was adapted and adopted by different visions and people over time, and about how Ukrainians adopted trends and ideas of other cultures through trade and contact. So we grouped the accessories into these sort of constellations that allowed their visual resonances to speak to each other and that worked with what Natalka really wanted to say. The texture of them working together, I think also I wanted to create those rhymes I was talking about in the wider exhibition, but inside the smaller displays. And to acknowledge their importance and reinforce what we wanted to say with the whole show, about how the ways we adorn ourselves don't exist in a vacuum, and the layered, assembled, relational network of design is really important. This is just a fun behind the scenes. Okay, perfect. So when I look to what we did with the design, looking back on it, and the framework that we used, we really wanted to invite people to encounter these objects not as static cultural artifacts, but to show the old with the new, to show Natalka's collection alongside the museums, and to express that these objects are ultimately shifting and moving and not still. Getting some outfits together. I love this picture. When it came down to it, the unexpected combinations became kind of a method for the display, and, showing a richly embroidered blouse with a designer skirt, and a beautiful ornate jacket against the pattern pieces I hope start to make a viewer wonder how the jacket was made, how the skirt came to be. A carefully constructed garment accompanied by the repetition of a stencil drawn from a single detail in a garment hopefully draws a lot of attention to that detail and hopefully makes people see the details differently. I wanted to ask viewers to notice construction rather than just surface. And we didn't want to resolve the objects or put a period on their stories, but rather to activate them into something new and carry them forward, like so many people have done before us, to bring them here today. So again, looking back, I guess coming out of the exhibition, I kept returning to the idea that what we were really designing was not just a space for objects, but trying to consider a new way of seeing them. And the exhibition, again, began through this collaboration with Natalka, with Alexandra, with staff, with visitors, and then with the collection itself. And then the slow kind of accumulative process of spending time with everything included. And in that sense, the exhibition is assembled much like all the objects, garments, accessories within it, through a lot of layered attention and through time. At the core, the project is asking how we encounter clothing in museum spaces, what assumptions we bring into that encounter. Traditional display systems often stabilize garments into fixed identities, heritage costume or ethnography or fashion history, but it's almost always finished form. And we really wanted to resist that stability. Natalka's work and her concept and her writing resisted that stability and questioned the ways that Ukrainian clothing is thought about and conceptualized, and instead of treating the garments as endpoints, we tried to present them as ongoing processes that are shaped by adaptation. I wanted to use the design of the show to expose the patterns, color, material present in the clothing. All of these elements were there for me to work with going into the design process, which again made it really organic and it was an exciting project for me. At the same time, there was a consistent commitment to vitality. It was never enough for the exhibition to function only as critique or analysis. It also needed to feel alive and have that color and humor and pleasure and a bit of visual excess that would maybe create that delight for viewers. I think this is particularly important when working with Ukrainian clothing, which is so often reduced to a narrow idea of what it can mean. And the collection here, and Natalka's collection, holds so much variation and intensity and excitement. And I wish we could have shown every garment in the collection because they all have so much story. I wanted the design of the show to reflect that variety rather than flatten it. So we were trying to hold the tension between places and time without trying to resolve anything, but rather to invite new reflection in. And the objects in the show, we wanted to let them exist as material things, hold the beauty and the craft within them, but also operate as narrative and cultural momentum. So the questions I was left with when all was said and done were about how we continue to preserve clothing, how we continue to read it, how we allow objects to remain open for reinterpretation by different forms of attention and different ways of seeing. And I want all of us, our little sweet group here today, to keep thinking about what it means to inherit textile traditions, not as fixed forms that are pre-decided, but as ongoing processes of making and remaking. And going forward, working in textile especially, I want to consider how artists, curators, exhibition designers, etc., can participate in the continuation of textile processes, not by giving them a fixed meaning, but by keeping them in motion. We wanted the show to create a space for seeing differently and to create conditions where garments could not only be seen, but actively encountered as lively, unresolved relational objects. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
So, if anyone was under the impression that when we put up a show, we just get the things and we put them on the wall, I think what was so some of the background, what you were looking at and thinking about when installing this exhibition. But there's like theory is brought into it, and contemporary art is brought into it, and all of this requires years of study and a dedication and an expertise to kind of bring all these elements together, and that is the thing that we have been dedicated to in trying to wake up this museum. Where we are working with our beautiful collection, and we're trying to tell a story of history and heritage, but we want to bring everything alive, so we need a new language. And I think heritage museums are stuck as a rule, and we're trying to kind of reinvent how a heritage museum can tell stories. And I think that your talk shows that it's possible, but B, we need a new set of expertise brought into the heritage museum, not the traditional ones. It's not enough just to know the history, right? And I think that what you've done here can really serve as a model and inspiration for other heritage museums and for us as we go forward with more exhibitions. Fortunately, Rachel's also curating our next exhibition in this space, which opens in September. But that was really exciting, and to think about all of those different elements, all those different things you were looking at when designing the space. It's really marvelous, and I think you really did do justice to Natalka's incredibly complex and beautiful way of thinking about clothing, and the way that she brings these histories alive through her own form of storytelling. You've been able to do that here through your exhibition design. So yeah, I did want to say too that it is when we put something like we did this on the cheap, and so we were all painting in here. Rachel was spray painting the bases of the mannequins. We borrowed mannequins from another museum in town as well. Like we do things in a way that's really do it yourself, and we're lucky to have a great team too with Lindsay designing the didactics as well. Like it was a full-on kind of getting dirty process for staff, so we don't just give talks and write things or plan things. It's a lot of just actually building things too, and getting a little bit dirty. But that was wonderful, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Any questions from the audience?
Will we be doing men's clothing next?
Oh, we should.
We could.
And we should, because it would be really interesting. It would be a different show. It would have, yeah.
The men did wear something.
We have a few elements of men's clothing in the show. We have very little. We have two coats and we have accessories. So this is definitely a woman-centered show. And I think some of that is simply, more than half of the items in this show come from Natalka Chomiak's collection, and she's been amassing a collection over 40 years or so, and I've noticed that her collection is mostly in very small sizes, and she's a very small woman, and so she was buying these things to wear as well, and then realizing at some point she had a collection. So that's partly where it came. But there is a story to tell in men's clothing, and actually that's an interesting one too, because men more than women, I think, had to sort of culturally pass when they came to Canada, and so they really had to tone down the Ukrainian love of pattern and color, and so that's a different story too. So so part of it too would be that women were allowed to be more expressive in their clothing in Canada, and so with modern clothing and modern silhouettes, the embroidery could continue, the color could continue. For men, it wasn't quite that easy, which is why you see things where the watch fobs. You can open your suit and suddenly you have this beautiful beaded watch fob, or the traditional kind of Western men's overcoat, wool overcoat, winter coat, where it flashes the inside of a traditional sheepskin coat on the inside that's been hand sewn into a store-bought coat. So there's little things like that, but it's a great question.
I think that would be a really cool show.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm wondering about the Berlin rose.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it called that, and like, did it originate in Berlin? Is it a German pattern?
Yes, it's a German pattern. It's like the I think it is from Germany, but I believe the woman who kind of created the company, her last name was Berlin, and I don't know as much about it as I should because Natalka was kind of teaching me about it in the moment, but it was really this woman who's Berlin was making these designs, and that was her genius business idea, was to put them inside of soap packages, and so that was kind of how they got everywhere. But the rose was the most famous, most beloved one. You can kind of see them, they're you can see them in any antique store. Yeah.
With that, please.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for
Mhm.
coming, and
Yeah.
help yourself to a glass of tea or a cup of tea out in the lobby. And I appreciate you coming here. We're gonna have to get that from you and help publish it. Yeah, I'm just grateful that you came. We're really proud. Like, we're proud of this show, and I think we're proud as a team of the kind of thought we give to exhibition design. And one of the things for us is like, we want the shows to be beautiful, to draw people in. People come and want to enter into the histories that we tell. People have different capacities for like how you enter into it. Some people are readers and they want to come in and read everything. Other people get drawn into, people come and they love this for different reasons, but they get drawn into the space itself, or it's the colors and the didactics. Other people, it's about the sewing. Some people want to think about how the clothes are made. Other people are just excited to see the contemporary things in here. So the more reasons we can give people to fall in love with our shows and to draw people in, I think this is what we aim to do, and just constantly invite a wider audience into our stories. And so we're actually really proud of this work. We've gotten a lot of excellent feedback from museum interpreters who've come in on trips to say this is such a well-designed show, and we're especially proud because we're just a small, scrappy team. And we do this so cheaply, right? So this is, I'm glad that we did this talk today to tell you about how we do it, because I think it's hard to imagine what goes into it if you don't hear the story. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.